Welcome to Surviving Society. Welcome to another episode of Surviving Society. This is our series about neurodiversity in the 21st century, one very close to my heart. Today we are joined by Tumi, aka the Black Dyspraxic. Tumi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shanta, for having me. I've been following the podcast for a while, so I'm glad that I can jump on and talk about such an important topic.
Tumi, I'm going to just be really real. You're one of the first knowingly dyspraxic other black person that I've met. That was such a dyspraxic way of explaining another black dyspraxic. We are out there. We are here.
In October, I hosted a Black History Month event for Dyspraxic magazine, and I was able to interview four other Black Dyspraxics. So we are out there.
We are out there.
In the neurodiversity space, every neurotype has their season of appeal. Right now it's ADHD. A decade ago it was dyslexia. Maybe eventually they'll get around to us. I always talk about dyspraxia being like the Cinderella of the pack. But again, there's dyspraxia that's probably known more about than like Tourette, for example, or dysgraphia or dyscalculia. There's so many other neurotypes that we need to talk about.
100%. And I guess for me, my journey with dyspraxia, I think, and just to say for listeners, so dyspraxia is a developmental coordination disorder. So it looks different for different dyspraxics. But for me, how that looks is it took me 7 years to learn how to drive. I get my left and rights mixed up. I often spill food down myself. These are the negatives. I'm going to go on to the positives. I get lost a lot, or previously in the past, I get lost a lot. I need maps to get me through. I sometimes trip up my words, or my brain thinks more quickly than my mouth can speak. And that is a combination of ADHD and dyspraxia as well. A little bit dyslexia in there. But yeah, Tumi, do you want to just introduce what your dyspraxia looks like?
Yeah. What you talked about combination of ADHD and co-occurrence is a thing. Not many of us have a little bit of everything. It's a mixed bag, really. And I think that's what neurodiversity is about. Like these names like ADHD, dyspraxia, they're just labels.
Yeah.
But neurodiversity is all about the fact that everybody has a different brain, and the brain is complicated, right? So one word or two words can't really describe what your brain is like. So this is just how we kind of understand, how we try to describe what's going on in the brain. But everybody's brain is beyond dyspraxia, so beyond ADHD, if that makes sense. Now to answer your question.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, me.
Coordination is a big thing. Mm-hmm. So for me, I still can't learn how to drive. My wife just passed her driving test.
Wait, that's amazing.
Things like DIY can't really do, struggle with things like buttons, tying my shoelaces. And this is really a big thing because I like trainers. Trainers are really cool. Tying shoelaces is an issue. Cufflinks. I'm really messy. Try to be more organized and stuff, but just quite messy. Struggle with sleep sometimes, and even just expressing ideas on a piece of paper. So my handwriting is a mess. One would think that, okay, learning to touch type, but again, hand-eye coordination, not really. And then text-to-speech is okay, but some of the assistive technology is better than others. Right now, I've learned to just type in a way where I enjoy it. Sometimes when I'm typing, I'm listening to a podcast or music, and I just learned to enjoy the time. But I always talk about how thinking about the intersectionality of being Black and dyspraxic. If you think about it, there's a lot of things that we associate with blackness, especially Black men, that are to do with coordination. So society says that Black men are athletic, sporty, we're supposed to have rhythm, we're supposed to be good at dancing and all of those type of things, and none of those things apply to me. So sometimes growing up, I would be like, am I even black enough? Because when we used to do sports days, for example, in school, all the other black guys would be first or second in 100 meters. I would come last, and all the white kids would be in between, for example, and that's the kind of thing, Wasn't the best at basketball, but these were advantageous because it meant that already that those kind of stereotypes were challenged in myself. One thing that I was good at is I enjoyed education. I loved math. I loved science, and so it was a positive thing because I didn't have to be like, okay, even if sport or rhythm weren't my forte, I knew that I was academic. So yeah.
I love that because I think, and thank you for sharing the kind of intersectionality of it and like being black and like coordination and dance and sport, because for me it's kind of like the inverse in that my dyspraxia didn't get diagnosed till I was in my 20s, but I knew that there was something going on, and clearly I have multiple neurodivergent traits. However, I'm really short-sighted, so I wear contact lenses and I wear glasses like you, Tumi, and I have -8. If anyone knows about glasses and prescriptions, my lenses are -8, right? Yeah. So some of the things that were picked up as a child for me were kind of blamed on my short-sightedness and the fact that I had bad eyesight. And then also, I was actually good at sport. I was good at netball, and I was a dancer as well as a kid. So it was quite weird because it was like these things that kind of are supposedly fit within the dyspraxic box didn't really fit with me. So it's like that potentially why it didn't get picked up. But then eventually, when I got my diagnosis, the guy that did it was just like, "You are definitely dyspraxic." And I didn't even know what
to show that everybody's unique, right?
Yeah.
You can say that once you meet one dyspraxic person, you've just done that. You've met one dyspraxic person, and that's the same that applies to all different forms of neurodivergence.
Yeah, 100%. And do you know what? I think out of all, so I've got ADHD, dyslexic, and dyspraxic, and suffer from depression as well. And I think that out of all of the different neurodivergent traits, I think that the dyspraxia I've definitely held quite a lot of shame around, because I think it's the one that kind of shows up in your kind of everyday, mundane, ordinary activities. And I think that I've kind of developed a thick skin because I've like fall over a lot in front of people and whatever. And I think that's a positive. But I also think I've had to really look at my dyspraxia more recently and be kinder to myself and more loving of myself, because actually as I said, I've held a lot of shame around it. Like it's been at the forefront of like getting lost or like spoiling a new t-shirt or like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. Because I think for me, I was diagnosed at the age of 4. So I don't know life without my dyspraxia.
Yeah.
And I know later on, like a clinician actually said that they do detect some parts of ADHD as well. But for me, I feel like so many people don't know about dyspraxia that I always try to lean onto that. Because it's so important to fly the flag for dyspraxia. And actually, I know you've had one of my dear friends, Professor Nancy Doyle, on the pod.
Big up Nancy.
She did some research to say that actually dyspraxia is actually more prevalent than ADHD and autism in society. I'll send you the paper, but the ratio of research is like 50-1. So for every 50 studies of autism, there's one dyspraxia study. So it's not that it's a neurotype that is not as prevalent or common. It's just the publicity is not as out there.
And what is that? What is that? I did a TikTok about it the other day. I was like, dyspraxia, she does not get the representation she deserves.
Yeah.
Like, what is
And then I'm
it?
not sure if you know the Dyspraxic Foundation, like literally the biggest national charity for us, got disbanded this year because of lack of funding and everything like that, just making it difficult and harder. And so I think it's multifactorial. So we've talked about dyspraxia, but we've also mentioned developmental coordination disorder because developmental coordination disorder is the medical term. There's no medical consensus of what dyspraxia is, and I think stuff like that just makes things a bit more confusing because when you don't have one singular, because dyslexia doesn't have that issue or ADHD doesn't have that issue. I think across the world, I think the UK is one of the only people that actually use the term dyspraxia as commonly as we do. So I think that's when gets more confusing. But it's also, I think the issues are multifactorial, right? And this is why when my advocacy, I always say to people that advocate for other neurotypes, like we have to come together and talk about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion because there's no point just doing things in isolation anymore.
No.
And that's how the NHS and the educational system focuses on it, you know. You have your autism diagnosis, but then you might have to be in the queue for your ADHD, and then you then have to be diagnosed with dyslexia. But why don't we just diagnose one person that, okay, what is your brain like? Okay, and then actually think about interventions for the whole person, understanding that co-occurrence does exist.
Like 100%, like nothing in isolation. I think you're spot on. And I was just kind of thinking as you were speaking, like, again, like this question mark around dyspraxia, like why is there much less known about it? Why is it not getting the representation? All this stuff. And maybe it is to do with how it shows up and like the shame around it because it kind of, and again, talking for myself, the way it manifests is in social life is akin to unsocial or unrespectable acts or mannerisms.
It used to be called clumsy child syndrome, right? So, you know, your dyspraxic is probably that person that people will say, oh, you're so clumsy, or you're such a klutz, or you're a bit ditzy, and these kind of things. And for me, I've done a lot of funny things in the past that people will laugh at. And I think part of the way I navigate the world as a dyspraxic is the fact that I don't take myself too seriously.
Yeah.
It's on of banter. So, for example, I had that friend at university who was dyspraxic as well, and you used to have a really cool high five called the dyspraxic high five. And what we'll do is we'll high five each other, but we'll purposely miss each other. And people will just see us in public to be like, what on earth was that? But that was our high five because we just weren't taking ourselves so seriously. And I think it's really important because life is too short.
Exactly. And that kind of brings me on to like the positives of like talking about dyspraxia, like because of how we experience the world, like we're deep empaths, aren't we? Like there's a level of connection with other forms of marginalisation that I think dyspraxics have or have capacity to have that I think is really powerful.
Yes, definitely. And I think that goes to say with neurodivergent people across the board. Strong sense of social justice.
Yeah.
Strong understanding, incredibly resilient, incredibly innovative as well. And I think for me, I think one of the reasons why I started the Black Dyspraxic was to talk about the intersectionality for people that are not black, to say that we do exist, but also to challenge stigma within the community as well. Like to actually within the black community to actually say, you know what, there are dyspraxics and other neurodivergent people that are doing incredible things. Like some of the most famous entrepreneurs and social justice people. So think about Greta Thunberg or Richard Branson. All these people are neurodivergent. Imagine what the black community would look like if we championed those guys as well in
Yeah.
our community. So Willie I am has ADHD. Simone Biles has ADHD. I haven't known a famous black person that has
Dispra-
disclosed dyspraxia, which would be interesting. But my
it's
point
coming. It's
is,
coming. It's coming.
yeah, but my point is that these neuro minorities exist with the black community and we should be championing them because we have a lot to offer.
100%. And in true neurodivergent style, like we just got straight into it to me. And like, actually, can we roll back? Please tell the listeners about the Black Dyspraxic. What is it? How did you start it? Tell us all the things.
Okay. So the Black Dyspraxic is initially it started as an Instagram page, which came out of the fact that one of one a great friend of mine, Remy Ray, who is also dyslexic, was having her company, the Diverse Creators CIC, was having an event in October 2019 for Black History Month, and it was about neurodiversity, and it was called Through the Lens. And she had a lot of women on the panel, black women on the panel, but she was looking for a black man to join the panel. And she put it on LinkedIn, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, I think you'll be a really good fit for that." And so we got to talking. I came all the way from Newcastle to attend the event, and I publicized it. A lot of my family and friends came, and we talked about it, and I just loved the energy in the room. And I was already contemplating the Black Dyspraxic starting something, but I didn't really start anything. But from then, that was the first time I talked about dyspraxia publicly. Like before, I used to talk about dyspraxia to friends or like in a church setting when I was like sharing a testimony at church, but actually in a neurodiversity specific way. And I was like, actually, this is really cool. I enjoy talking to people and stuff, and I really love the energy in the room. So I started the page 2019 and just talking about stuff. And then obviously 2020, George Floyd was happened. The world
Yeah.
realized that actually black people are important. They just and so I was just like creating more content and all of that, and um, just a lot of opportunities came about being featured in different magazines, companies asking me to talk and to share my experience. And I've literally just been built from there. And since then I've been able to do public speaking, been able to give advice for multiple clients as well. I'm on a few boards as well, and just really just sharing impact of what dyspraxia is and what it means to the black community. But I also try and do a lot of work to build relationships with neurodivergent advocates on the continent of Africa as well, and to talk about, okay, what can the global black population, how can we get together and actually think about, okay, um, advocating and sharing the story of neurodivergent individuals across the world. So yeah, that's a whistle top low, but I'm trying to just think about a lot more. So right now, this year I've done a lot of talk about the experience of black men who are neurodivergent and black men and mental health. So a lot of corporate clients are asking for that perspective as well. So yeah, like listening to that podcast, Nancy talking about how a lot of black women are killing it, and I actually put on social media to shout out to a lot of my amazing sisters that are doing great stuff. But I like to hold the space to say, actually, the voice of the black neurodivergent man needs to be discussed as well. And so
100%.
shout out to
100%.
people like Jason Ade as well,
Yeah.
because it's really important. And I've had people actually DM me saying, "Can you please speak to my son?"
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So those type of things do happen because it's important.
Tumi, when I listen to you speak and when we've chatted, and it's always such a privilege because you inspire me and you kind of pour into me as well. Like, it always feels like a mirror when I'm speaking to you, and it helps me to heal bits of myself that I'm still kind of working through and looking to understand. So I'm always so grateful, like, to hear from you in this way. And you make some really important points, particularly around Black neurodivergent men. No doubt about it. Like, the brothers need bigging up, like, and need that space. And I think that I've been at times critical of the kind of representation model around neurodivergence, particularly because it hasn't, or the neurodiversity movement, because there sometimes hasn't been enough emphasis on, like, the materiality of neurodiversity and, like, class and, like, how important it is to have, like, access to resources and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, like, we know that for parents with neurodivergent children, seeing people like yourself, like, being out there speaking, it gives you a sense of, is what they say to me, a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of, like, being seen. So, like, basically what I'm saying is I sometimes, speaking to people like you reminds me the representation is really important because it does a lot of work for people.
Yeah. Representation is key. I agree with you. I know that in the last few months, there's been a lot of debate about, okay, there's good representation and there's bad representation. You know, if you think about politics, well, we wouldn't go there. You know, it's about, yes, representation, but making sure that they do the work as well. But one thing I didn't say is that my 9 to 5, I'm also a health economist. And so for me, a really big part of my story is the fact that I started going to private school at the age of 7 till like 16 because of that diagnosis, and my parents knew that I would need the extra help. So I went to a mainstream private school. But a lot of the discussions that I talk about is that I recognize that that was a privilege.
Yeah.
And I recognize that, especially when a lot of people in the Black community don't have access to that, you know, don't have access to a private diagnosis. So there's a long waiting list. And where we are is that we are in a massive storm where cost of living crisis on the back of 14 years of austerity, and there's an increased awareness of neurodivergence and differences, and people realize that they actually need the help, but our public services have been decimated. And it's a perfect storm. I think maybe perfect is not the word, but it's just so many things are happening now. Like the NHS, okay, now a lot of people are now understanding that they have ADHD and they need, you know, the diagnosis and the treatment, but the NHS can't cope. And these are the issues, and this is really important. And this is why in my talks, I recognize that when we think about intersectionality, we obviously know that when we talk about intersectionality, originally it was about multiple forms of marginalization. But actually, I believe that intersectionality could be a good framework to talk about privilege as well. And actually, that even within the Black community, we're not all a monolith. Some people in the Black community are more privileged than others. Like I've just mentioned, you know, having access to private services and stuff. But instead of me just being like, okay, that was me, and, you know, I recognize that that was a privileged position and not everybody has access to that. And it's really important that if we're thinking about a more equitable society, we can't just think about race, we can't just think about gender, we can't even think about LGBT issues. Class is such an important thing. And I think I realized that even more being based up north now, being in Newcastle, that I speak to my friends all the time that if you've lived in the southeast and you live in the north, you can compare it and you're like, wow, there's such a discrepancy. Again, I've said a lot of things there.
No, there's a few things I want to pick out to me. Thank you. Like, again, like, it's such a mirror. Like, I love just being in community and sparring with other, like, Black neurodivergent people, particularly dyspraxics as well. Like, there's so many points that I just want to pick up on. The first point, thank you so much for sharing about your experiences at private school. And I think it's just so important that more of us that have had different forms of privileges like speak on those things around marginality, because it's just the difference between us being sat here and not, like, in many cases. Do you know what I mean? So thank you so much for bringing that up. So I really liked what you said about privilege. And then the class stuff, like, if you've lived in the provinces of England, like, life is challenging, obviously, in cities as well. I don't get it twisted, but like, there are other versions of class inequality as well that we have to be taken into consideration. And I think you're right. If you've lived in so I was born in London, grew up for a bit in the Medway towns in Kent, and then grew up in Bromsgrove in the West Midlands. And I was in the West Midlands around the kind of financial crash, like when MG Rover went all under, like everyone lost their jobs, And I remember coming to London in 2014, so I got my first grad job, and I remember talking to people in the office being like, what was the financial crash like for you guys? Like, da, da, da. And they didn't really compete. Yeah. It wasn't, obviously it was big for people, but not in the way that I'd remembered it or and experienced it.
Yeah. Definitely. And can I just say, it's really interesting that, I listen to a lot of people in London talk about how the budget, how there's so much tax. A lot of my friends are thinking about businesses and wealth creation, that why are they taxing businesses and all of these things. And I'm like, if you understand the effect that austerity had in communities outside of London, you would understand that we need as much money as you can to even just start addressing these issues.
100%.
There's a reason why people where I'm from, where I am at the moment, there's a reason why they voted for us to come out of the EU. There's a reason why race riots are happening up north and stuff. And a lot of people in the Black, I'm like, no, you have to think bigger. There's more than just what's happening in London or the centre of Birmingham and stuff. I think I read a fact that if you take London out of the UK, economically, even Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, is better off than the UK. That's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's something that needs to be fixed. That regional inequality.
Inequality, yeah.
It's massive. It's massive. And when we think about regional inequality, it's beyond just race. It's beyond gender. And that's why, maybe controversial, but that's why sometimes I hear it, why politicians talks about what about that white guy that grew up on a council estate in the Northeast, because sometimes when we talk about issues, we don't really talk about regional inequality enough, because like you said, you talked about the industries that left in the West Midlands. That's happened across the North, and that hasn't been replaced. We live in a country where it's so focused on the financial services and stuff like that.
And you're spot on. And to me, if we bring that back to neurodiversity and SEN, special educational needs in schools, we know that disparities in terms of who's getting resources as well, is huge. Neurodiversity is an education issue, it's a materialities issue, it's an economics issue, it's all these things wrapped in.
It's a health issue.
It's a health issue.
Everything is, it's a multifactorial, it's multi-industry. And I think as an academic, as a researcher, that makes it interesting, right? And this is where one of the things that I'm big on, and I didn't really talk about this, is the fact that I'm really passionate about applying neurodiversity to economics, or applying economics to neurodiversity.
Oh my God, please, go on.
Neurodiversity economics, because when we think about neurodiversity, we think about psychology, or we think about medicine, or we think about education, but we need to actually think about it from a macro level, to think about, okay, how do all these systems work together and intersecting, improve the lives of everybody, And that's where economics is important. How do we leverage resources in a way that's equitable and efficient for everybody?
And how
You
do
know,
we, to me? How do we?
the thing is, you can't really answer that unless you start looking at the data and
Yeah.
ask those questions. But definitely, it starts with readdressing um, austerity and
Yeah.
investing in our public services and doing it incredibly. Like, we can't just raise taxes and then not invest in our public. So it's going to be really interesting if you're taking that much money from people, irrespective if it's business or individuals. I need to see from this government
What
now
happens? Yeah.
what happened, what's going to happen with those 40 billion. Are we going to have economic growth? Like, is wealth and is it going to be distributed more?
Yeah.
Can we empower our regional mayors more effectively? I I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember the name, but it was Mr. Moneyjar. I'm sorry, I'm giving a lot of shout outs.
Yeah,
I'm
go
not sure
on,
about
Mr.
that.
Money Jar.
But
Yeah, yeah.
he made a really good point that actually in the UK, we have a first minister for Scotland, we have a first minister for Wales, and we have a first minister for Northern Ireland, but we don't have the equivalent for England. Meanwhile, the majority of the people of the UK actually live in England. What would happen if you had the first minister for the northeast or the first minister for the
Yeah.
northwest? But then we do have regional mayors, but do they even have enough power to think about the regions? Like in America, they have governors. They have
Yeah.
people that are responsible for the regions. And we need to. And when he said that, I was like, that's an amazing point. Because we need
Yeah.
people that are going to be like, I know the local issues,
Yeah.
and I can address these regional inequalities. Because we talked about regional inequalities. If the life chances of someone that has dyspraxia in London is different from the life chances of someone that has dyspraxia in Sunderland, that's an issue.
Yeah.
If you think about education, if you think about health, if you think about poverty, that's very likely. We haven't even talked about the criminal justice system and about how if you're more likely to be excluded from school, if you're more likely to be bullied and want friendship and want identity and the community, you're more likely to get into crime. And that's why there's a higher proportion of people who are neurodivergent involved in the criminal justice system compared to the general population. And this is my pet peeve, right? When people talk about neurodivergent and criminal justice, they don't think about criminal justice at race at the same time. So we don't look at these things from an intersectional perspective. We think about mental health in neurodivergent people, but we don't then talk about the racial disparities of actually what happens to Black neurodivergent individuals with mental health. And that's what I'm trying to beat the drum up, that we need to be intersectional in our research and our discussions.
Honestly, to me, you've just inspired me just so much. Like, just sat here now, I'm just thinking, like, my brain's like, oh, we need to have a Black Dyspraxic series, like, of Surviving Society. Like, we need to do all these things. Like,
talked
more
about
people.
it,
Yeah,
and
we do. We need to. And that's the thing. Do you know what, right? One thing, I think I've said this on the podcast before, a lot of us neurodivergent people, particularly those of us that straddle kind of dyspraxia, ADHD, like we're ideas, we're visionary, but we need the administrators. And do you know what? I'm really lucky. I've got a lot of administrators around me now, and that enables me to put into practice my ideas much better. But it's all when like me and you are together, it's like, we could take over the world.
I need more administrators.
You need more.
Like
Any neurodivergent people listening to this now who have issues with organisation, where your strengths are necessarily in organisation administration, you need people around you that are like, because we need to balance out each other.
Exactly. So my quote unquote administrator is my wife.
Yeah, you've said this to me before, and we've got to sort this out, to me, because she.
Yeah, it's just too much.
It's too much.
I'm like my wife. Like I think I was saying that to her yesterday that I'm so blessed to be with someone that's so understanding and so patient and everything. But it's just too much to put on one
Your
band.
wife is a beautiful, beautiful soul. Like,
Yeah,
incredible.
she's a queen.
Yeah.
She's a queen, but it's a lot, you know, to do everything. But then to get administrators, it's privilege,
It
right?
is.
Because
It
then
is.
administrators need to be paid.
Yeah, it is. It's a
and
lot.
And we talk about access to work, and
Yep.
access to, anyone listening to this, access to work is not just for employment. If you do have
Yep.
a business or you do have some, you can access some funding. But I often say access to work is sometimes not very accessible. And because of austerity and because of the effect of public, the weight is just incredibly large. And I realized that I needed administrators and needed people to influence first when I was at university, because
Yeah.
at university I was elected president of my ACS in first
Hey.
year. And for me that was amazing because that was the first time that I felt that my people around me saw the value in me from a
Yeah.
big scale. But the thing is, we were really able to do amazing things that academic year. Like, we quadrupled membership, we increased our turnover. But I realized all I did was suggest ideas, communicated.
And then
But
people put
all of
them
a
into
sudden, I
practice.
had competent people within the
Yeah. Yeah.
community to
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
execute. And I was like, whoa, I'm actually a really good leader.
Yeah.
I can actually lead as long as I communicate the vision and stuff. But then when we think about with the world of work, right? Some of these skills to implement and to create ideas and to get people to execute your ideas, you have to be quite up within your career to actually utilize those skills. Like, for example, in my 9 to 5, I'm a research assistant, and in academia, you're the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah.
You can have as many ideas as you want. Ain't nobody gonna implement that, and that could be said with across the world in different jobs. So that means that people who are neurodivergent are not even able to manifest and showcase their source as much as they need to. So how do employers think about, okay, how can we get administrators and link them up with the innovators
Yeah.
and bring that together? And just on the innovation point, I know there's time,
Yeah.
is that if you think about the innovation and the originality that neurodivergent people have, if government was aware of this and business was aware of that, actually investing and supporting these ideas and problem solvers can be seen as a supply side policy.
Yeah.
Because
Spot
your
on.
neurodivergent individuals are more likely to be your entrepreneurs and your but actually the people that we think about, the Richard Bransons and the amazing
Yeah.
entrepreneurs that are neurodivergent, most of them came from privilege.
100%.
So it's
We need
breaking
to,
that.
breaking down and reinvesting. Tumi, thank you so much for joining me today. You're definitely going to hear more of Tumi on the show, team. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe to host or produce a series of Surviving Society.
Get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.